taking advantage of those first few fish that really slide up into that, catching some of the biggest fish of the year. February is, in my opinion, one of the best months to catch really big fish in a lot of the country. Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel and back to the Technique of the Month video. And again, for 2024, we're kind of combining that, pick 2 more, pick 4 baits into the Technique of the Month video to really, make that into one a little bit larger, a little bit longer episode, but, go over all parts of it, of picking a couple baits and then helping you apply them out there on the water on a technique or kind of a pattern that should be applicable for wherever wherever you're fishing at this time of the year for most of the country, hopefully. It's hard to do a breakdown for all across the country because everybody's dealing with a little bit different stuff. But hopefully these are, close enough to you, close enough time-wise that you're able to go out there on the water and catch some fish doing it. So for February, kind of what I want to talk about this month is that fishing that very first warm water. So that first warm water that you're able to experience. I feel like a lot of places we start seeing that in February. To me, the outlier of that would be a Florida. Even in Texas, you certainly see that, I think. But Florida's kind of would be the outlier, especially once you get from like Kissimmee on south. But most of the rest of the country, you're going to have those little spells where you get 2, 3, 4 days of warm weather, and sometimes that's coincides with warm rain, and that's we've talked about run-ins. We've done a video on that. So this is a little bit different from that. Maybe you've just had that warming trend without a big warm rain or anything, and it could have coincided with it. So you've got some run-in warm water as well as just some stuff that's warming up. But this, I'm really kind of thinking about a lot of those places that are just going to start warming a little bit quicker than a lot of other parts of the lake. Those places that are a little bit more protected, that maybe they're not right out in the main channel, especially a lot of those shallower bays, those places that are kind of tucked away. They're out of the wind, but they get the sun. Some of those areas that just are going to warm faster than the rest of the lake and the rest of the body of water, and taking advantage of those first few fish that really slide up into that. A good part of what you can experience with that is catching some of the biggest fish of the year. February is, in my opinion, one of the best months to catch really big fish in a lot of the country. From Texas to even as far north as Kentucky or somewhere, the fish that you can catch this time of the year can be some of the very biggest ones that you'll see all season long. And I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand. It's just how shallow some of those fish will get, especially when you start getting those little bit of just those little small warming trends, those little small warming windows. So kind of some of the places, before we get into the baits and stuff, some of the places that you're going to want to look for that, I already mentioned, places that are out of the wind, places that get some sun. If it is a warm wind, places that are going to be collecting that warm wind. That's something that I've been out there on the lake before, and say you've got a 5 or 10 mile an hour southwest warm breeze, blowing across the lake. The south bank where that wind is coming from, I've seen times where that south bank will be 46, 48 degrees. You get over where that 65-degree wind is blowing into the kind of pockets where it's pushing back into, and it may be 54, 56 degrees over on that other side of the lake, because that top little bit of the water is what's warming the most, right? You've got that top 4 inches, 6 inches, whatever. That's what's warming the most as it blows across the lake. Well, then by the time it gets over there across the lake and it collects it back in a cove or something, that water is then stirring on top of itself, and more of it's layering in there on top of itself. And that water is going to be considerably warmer than this other side of the lake over here, where it's just blowing that warm water right off of. So I've seen those places where I've had a vast temperature difference just based on wind, not any kind of runoff, nothing else. And I've seen that time and time again, and I've caught lots and lots of fish out of that. So if you've got a warm day and you've got a little bit of a breeze, absolutely go to the windy side of the lake, because that water is almost always going to be a little bit warmer. But if it's just a normal day, not much wind or something like that, those places that are protected from that north wind, where the water's not going to be blowing in on, from a north wind. So usually the south side of the lake, those places do tend to warm a little bit slower. So generally speaking, the north side of the lake is going to warm a little bit quicker. It's going to get more of that sun coming from the south, as well as when you get those warm breezes, usually out of the south, it's going to push over to that north shoreline. So usually speaking, the north side of the lake is going to be a little bit warmer this time of the year. If you're fishing on more of a river system or a system, a lake system that gets a lot of current, that main channel, that main flow is usually going to be cooler this time of the year as well. That water that's moving like that, it's going to take it longer to warm up. So if you've had a couple nice days out there, it's been in the 50s, been in the 60s, something like that. You've had some sun. Those places that are in the current just aren't going to warm as fast because that water's moving by. It's not sitting still. It's not getting that opportunity to warm up, just kind of like that wind is pushing it off. That current is just going to keep washing it by. You get in those places where that water is still, and especially, honestly, where it's really shallow. And it can be one of two things. It can be really shallow, a foot, 2 foot deep, and it can be clear water but have a very dark bottom. If you get in those places that have a black bottom or a lot of moss, a lot of dead grass laying on the bottom, water's clear and the sun can go all the way through that water and get to that bottom, man, that can cause it to warm up really quickly. As well as we all know, dirty water is going to warm up generally a little bit faster than just regular clear water without anything going on the bottom. So those places that I like to fish dirty water, but I don't mind at this time of the year if the water's pretty clean, if that bottom is really dark, because that again is going to allow that water temperature to warm up a lot because of the sun rays going down and warming on that dark colored bottom. And that's some of my I've done some fishing around here early in the year in that February time frame where you get out of the current, you get up there in those places that are real shallow little protected places, and there's some dead grass and stuff laying around on the bottom. And man, we've caught some giants doing that with a couple of these baits this time of year. So that's kind of the technique. That's the type of places that you want to look for. One other thing that came to mind when I was talking about that and talking about the bottom having that dead grass and having a lot of black stuff on the bottom to really absorb the heat is boat docks that have black floats. If you've got a floating boat dock that's got those black plastic floats on it, and you've got the sun really baking in hard against that, and it has been all day, so it's a bright sunny day, that water temperature immediately around those floats, or especially if you've got a couple floats that are this far apart, that water temperature right up there around those floats, if you're back in a pocket that doesn't have much wind pushing the water around, can warm up very, very quickly. It would really surprise you just how much heat that those black plastic floats will put off and put into the water. So that's one other thing to look for. Those little small areas, it can be just one back of a little pocket like that. It's got the wind blowing in it. It can be a place, it's tucked in out of the current, a little small shallow pocket, or it can just be those floating docks that are in a cove that's getting the sun and not the wind. Can be those places where you're looking for that are going to make definitely a big difference in your catches throughout the day. So look for those little windows, those little opportunities of those warmer water. So now I actually ended up picking 3 baits to kind of cover for this technique, and really not so much around that boat dock part of it. That kind of just came to mind as we were talking about it, but these really all about fishing those shallow pockets or those backwaters off of the main channel that are warming up a little bit quicker, and kind of thinking along those lines. So first up, Lipless crankbait. That's the Storm Arashi Vibe. Really like that Lipless crankbait, and that's the classic crawl color. That's the version that I was coloring up with a Sharpie when I won the 2019 Classic here in Knoxville, and that was just a little bit later. That was in early March, early to mid-March is when that tournament took place. But definitely that Lipless crankbait bite, in my opinion, when I think February, it's going in the boat. I'm gonna have those in the boat, and that's if I'm in Tennessee. If I'm in Alabama, You know, if I'm Oklahoma, Texas, anywhere down in this part of the country, I'm definitely going to have lipless crankbaits in the boat this time of the year because they do a very, very good job of catching those bass that sometimes will be in really shallow water, 1 to 2 feet deep, out to 4 or 5 feet deep, and do a good job of doing that, especially in those flatter areas. But it's just a different, you know, it's a little different action, a little different profile than a standard crankbait, obviously because it sinks. So, you know, I'm reeling that bait along, I pull it, and I let off the gas, I stop reeling, that bait's going to then sink back to the bottom. The fact that it falls on the draw or on the pawls versus floating like a traditional crankbait, there are just times of the year, especially early in the year, when that triggers bites. You know, that pawls of the crankbait and the bait either kind of suspends or starts to rise. There's times that triggers bites. With a lipless early in the year, there's times when pausing that bait and it's sinking, that triggers bites. So definitely a good option this time of the year. Next up is a bladed jig. You know, I've caught fish on a bladed jig when that water's honestly from 45 degrees on up. You don't get a lot of bites on it in that cold water, but a lot of times those will be really big ones. And I'm usually going to use a dark color this time of the year. I feel like I just get a few more bites with a green pumpkin or a black and blue or something. And usually a 3/8 ounce because I am trying to fish it pretty shallow. I am trying to fish it really slow. So usually fishing that bait a little bit slower with that lighter weight is something I'm going to do. And typically that Bass Pro Super Shad trailer on the back of it and just match the color up. You know, that watermelon seed is what they call it, but it's kind of a dark green pumpkin. Is one of my favorite all-around go-tos. And that makes for a pretty good profile bait. You know, that's a pretty good size meal for one of those bass that are up there just starting to warm up a little bit. And that is one that will work well around those boat docks I was talking about with the black floats and stuff. And that 3/8 is really your better option because you're wanting to keep that bait up in the top couple feet of the water column. So that, you know, a 3/8 ounce bladed jig is definitely a good way to do that. Then the final one is a swim jig. And especially in those situations I'm talking about where you've got clean water, clean or dirty, but you've got a lot of vegetation. If that's old dead vegetation laying on the bottom, if you've got some lily pad stems still hanging around, any type of situation where you've got some vegetation, that lipless is going to work well if you've got like, you know, coontail and hydrilla and that type of stuff growing up that you can rip it through. But if it's just dead, mucky stuff kind of laying on the bottom, that dude's going to be gummed up every time it hits some of that stuff. With a swim jig, you're able to throw that out there and it can come right through that stuff pretty well. You may get a little bit on it and able to pop it and shake it off. But definitely the best in that really soft cover type stuff is that swim jig. That's the 3/8 ounce Terminator Pro Series swim jig. One of my favorite colors there. That's the Bama Crawl. And then that's a new Bass Pro swimming crawl, I think is what they're calling that I've got on the back of that. And I do like a big flappy legged trailer for my swim jigs this time of the year. I like something that creates a lot of resistance. And again, just like I was saying with the 3/8 ounce bladed jig instead of a 1/2 ounce, it has more lift to it. So I'm able to fish that bait a little bit slower because of those big flappy legs on the back of it. So that's kind of the deal with it. And we'll start with the rod and reel setup for the swim jig. I'm going to fish that on a carbon light. This is a 7.3 medium heavy action rod, carbon light reel. Usually an 8:3 to 1 gear ratio is what I like best on that, just because I can fish it as slow as I want to with that 8:3 to 1. But if that fish grabs the bait and comes at me, I'm able to take up the slack and get the hook in that fish really well. But again, 7.3 medium heavy, 8:3 to 1 reel. 7.5 works fine as well if that's what you've got. And then 50-pound test braided line. That's Bass Pro Shops 50-pound test braid on there. Man, just a very simple setup. That straight braid on that swim jig, and I'll throw that even if the water's pretty clear. You know, if it was super clear, maybe I would go and put a fluorocarbon leader on there. But most of the time, I don't have any trouble with getting bit with that straight braid on it. For the bladed jig, a Bass Pro crank and stick. This is a 7.3 heavy action. That's what I always fish my bladed jigs on. Just handles them really well. You can fish them on the 7-foot medium heavy, but I like just that little bit more power that heavy action has in that 7.3. Just a little bit longer rod as well. Again, a carbon light reel, that's a 7.5 to 1 is what I'll fish my bladed jigs on. It's what I'll fish spinner baits, buzz baits, that kind of stuff. 7.5 to 1, and then 17-pound XPS fluorocarbon line. I like the fluorocarbon because it has that little bit of give with that cranking stick that I like for fishing a bladed jig. But you know, it has a little bit of give and a little bit more invisible. And that's also a great setup. It's not too long, it's not too much if you are skipping that around some boat docks and stuff too. And then for the lipless, most of the time I'm going to end up fishing that on a 7-foot. If I'm out and you know, big time open water and just trying to make real long casts with it, I'll go up to the 7.6. But usually that 7-foot Bass Pro cranking stick, that's what's going to get it done for me. Medium heavy action. I like that extra power that medium heavy has. Same setup as always. 6.8 to 1 Bass Pro Shops Platinum reel. And I'm usually going to start with 14-pound XPS fluorocarbon. If I'm fishing really shallow and want to add some more lift to that bait, I'll go up to 17. I'll even go up to 20 if I feel like it's necessary, because I'm trying to fish the bait so shallow or so slow. Either one of those, it's going to just cause that bait to rise a little bit more, and you can help that offset, you know, you can help get that bait up a little bit more by going up in your line diameter size. So 14 is my go-to, but I will fish it on 17 a lot, and 20 on that really special occasion. But again, 6.8 to 1 speed on that reel. So this is I'll be honest, February is one of my favorite months to fish. Not necessarily every day of the month in February, but you catch the right weather conditions and you know, right weather, right water. If you can pick your days this time of the year, man, it can make for some really, really memorable trips. Not necessarily big numbers of fish, but absolutely big fish can be caught this month of the year, especially in this part of the world. Yeah, I love getting out there and trying to catch a monster in February. So hopefully one of these baits, one of these techniques will help you all out there on the water this month.